Anna was a woman whose heart was like a song, a gentle echo of the divine promise in a time when faith was the very structure of life. Her voice, it was a gift that seemed to have been shaped by the desert wind and the whisper of the palm trees. When she sang, it wasn't just the melody that resonated, it was a living prayer, a praise that lifted the soul of all who heard her. She was loved by her congregation, a small community nestled among the hills of Judah, and her presence was a balm. Her eyes, a brown that resembled the fertile soil of her land, shone with a fervor that was like a sacred fire. She was the voice that led the faithful to worship, and every syllable that escaped her lips was a link that connected them to heaven. However, behind that visible devotion, a feeling of bitterness began to take hold of her heart. Her brother David was the pastor of the community, and his leadership was seen as a direct blessing from heaven. He was the channel of the word, the guide. Of the flock, and the honor given to him was unquestionable. While Anna was applauded for her gift, David was revered for his authority. The difference between their recognition was subtle, but for Anna it was an abyss. She felt that her light, no matter how bright, was only a reflection of her brother's glory. This silent comparison became a poison in her heart, a resentment that she hid from everyone, even from herself, faking a humility she did not feel. Envy, like a parasite, began to feed on Anna's soul, and soon she could no longer contain her emotions. Her eyes, once full of light, now carried a shadow of judgment, and her words, once used for praise, began to become tools of discord. Subtly, she approached the members of the congregation, whispering in their ears doubts about David's leadership. "Does God only speak to him?" she would insinuate, with a sweet voice, but with a bitter heart. "Are we not all channels? Do we not all have the ability to hear his voice?" The seeds of dissatisfaction she planted, disguised as legitimate questions, found fertile ground in the hearts of the faithful. They, who once loved her for her voice, now began to feel confused, divided between reverence for David and sympathy for Anna. The atmosphere of the congregation, once so cohesive and full of peace, began to fragment. The songs of praise, which Anna led, no longer had the same power as before. The fervor that united everyone began to fade, replaced by a silent tension. People no longer looked at each other with the same trust. What was once a community united by an unshakable faith now became a field of whispers and uncertainties. Anna, in her blindness, did not realize the damage she was causing. She was so focused on undermining her brother's authority that she didn't realize she was destroying the foundation of her own house. She felt, in a way, justified in her actions, as if the recognition she sought gave her the right to act that way. However, no matter how much her mind tried to rationalize, her heart, deep down, felt the weight of the dishonor she was causing. That day arrived silently, but with relentless force. In the middle of a quiet morning, when the sun was already warming the village stones, Anna felt a strange itch, a burning sensation that began on the skin of her arms and quickly spread over her body. At first, she ignored it, thinking it was just a reaction to some plant or dust on the road. But the itch turned into pain, and the pain an unbearable burning. Looking at herself in the bronze mirror, her eyes, once so full of life, widened in horror. Her skin, once smooth and perfect, was now covered with white, scaly patches, like a map of an arid terrain. It was as if the disease that corroded her soul had finally found a physical form, a visible manifestation of the dishonor she had caused. Panic rose to her throat, a silent scream that mixed with her shame. The news of Anna's illness spread like an uncontrollable fire, and the congregation's love for her, which was once a living flame, became a fire that burned her. People, once so eager for her presence, now avoided her, stepping away with fear and repulsion. Her friends, her family, the entire community, all saw her with a mixture of sadness and dread. She, who was once the center of attention, now became an isolated figure, a modern leper in the midst of her people. The illness was not just physical, it was the reflection of her sick soul, the punishment for her envy and for having dishonored her brother and, by extension, God. She no longer had the right to be among them. The law was clear. 7 days of complete isolation, 7 days for her to face, alone, the result of her own actions. Anna's loneliness was not just physical, it was a cold stab in her soul. Isolated in a small tent, away from the camp, she felt the absence of everything. Silence, once an unknown sound to her, was now her only companion. There was no babble of children playing, no sound of herds grazing or murmur of conversations. Not even the sound of her own steps was familiar, muffled by the sand. The wind, which once refreshed her, now seemed to whisper her brother David's name in her ears, and the words of envy she had sown. She could feel the weight of her actions, not just in the white patches that covered her skin, but in the emptiness of her heart. Every minute of isolation was an eternity of repentance. She cried, not for the physical pain of the disease, but for the pain of her spirit, the pain of knowing she had betrayed herself, her brother, her community, and most of all, God. She had sought human glory and in doing so had lost divine grace. In her mind, a movie of her actions, of her words played, and she saw herself as a stranger, a corrupted version of herself. The beauty of her voice and the passion that consumed her were just masks that hid a sick heart. The warmth of the sun, which she once loved so much, now seemed like a purifying fire, burning her skin and her soul at the same time. Shame consumed her, making her wish the sand would swallow her whole. She saw herself as a dry, yellow leaf, torn from its tree, floating aimlessly in the middle of the desert. Her entire life, her entire search for recognition had proven useless. She had won the applause of the congregation, but had lost her own soul. Pride, that subtle and treacherous thing, had blinded her. The competition with David, which seemed so important, was now the most insignificant thing in the world. She wondered what had led her to this, and the answer was painful and clear: the lack of humility. She had forgotten that her gift was not hers, but a gift from God to serve. And instead, she had used it to compete and to elevate herself above others. The 7 days of isolation were not a punishment, she realized. They were an opportunity, a chance for her to turn inward and confront herself for real, without anyone's gaze. With every sunset, Anna felt a new weight on her heart, but a lightness in her mind. The forced solitude had stripped her of everything superfluous, leaving her with the naked and raw truth of who she really was. She remembered the laughter, the hugs, the looks of admiration she received, and realized that she had confused the love for her voice with the love for her person. Now, without her voice to guide her, and without the congregation's approval to sustain her, she felt exposed and vulnerable. One night, lying in Her tent, she saw the moon, a pale crescent, and felt a deep connection, as if it were a reflection of her own soul, stripped of its fullness and awaiting a miracle. She remembered a story her father used to tell about how God speaks in murmurs, not in storms, and she understood that to hear him she needed the silence, the stillness, the solitude that so afflicted her. For the first time in a long time, she bent down, not in prayer for herself, but in an act of genuine repentance. Anna's prayer was not a request, it was a confession. She spoke to God with the sincerity of a child who had gotten lost and finally found her way back. She confessed her envy, her pride, the way she had tried to steal her brother's glory. She did not ask to be healed. She asked to be forgiven. A tear streamed down her face, cleansing a spot on her skin, and she felt a relief that did not come from outside but from within. It was as if the words, as they left her mouth, were taking with them the weight she carried in her soul. The fragility of her own pride, which had once blinded her, now set her free. She understood that her true calling was not to lead, not to compete, but simply to serve. And that true glory was not to be seen, but to see God in every act of humility. Her time of purification was ending, and she was ready to face the consequences, whatever the result. She knew that the healing of her skin, if it came, would only be a reflection of the healing of her heart. She was prepared for everything except for the shame of having hurt herself, her brother, and her community. The morning of the seventh day arrived, and with it, a different light. The sunlight not only warmed her, but seemed to penetrate her skin, bringing a feeling she had never felt before, a deep peace and a relief that was not physical. From her tent, she could hear the murmur of the congregation, and instead of feeling the dread of being judged, she felt a genuine longing. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not tears of sadness, but of gratitude. She looked at her hands, which had once trembled with anxiety, and were now firm, ready for whatever came. With a light heart and a renewed soul, she left her tent. There was no longer the scream of panic, the shame that made her want to hide. There was only a quiet acceptance and a hope that even if the disease hadn't gone away, the healing had already happened inside her. She was ready to face the reality of her life, not as a fugitive, but as a redeemed woman. When she walked towards the congregation, the sight she saw was something that marked her forever. The people, once so distant, now looked at her with a mixture of surprise and reverence. The distance that the law imposed between a leper and the people was filled by God's mercy. Anna's skin, which 7 days ago was covered with spots, was now smooth and radiant, as if it had been washed by the water of life. What was once an image of pain and shame was now a living testimony of a miracle. Her healing was not gradual, it was sudden and inexplicable, a sign that God had acted supernaturally in her life. The congregation, which had avoided her, now received her with open arms, with tears in their eyes. The miracle was not just her healed skin, it was the reconciliation that was happening between her and her people. The reconciliation with the people was just the beginning. The most difficult, but also the most crucial moment was yet to come. The reunion with David. She looked for him, her heart in her hands, and found him in the synagogue courtyard, talking to the elders. Her presence made the conversation stop. The silence that followed was not one of judgment, but of a quiet expectation. David looked at her, And in his eyes, Anna did not see the anger or betrayal she expected. Instead, she saw a deep pain, a genuine sadness for her illness, and a compassion that completely disarmed her. She approached, and the words that were once so easy to utter now seemed stuck in her throat. She knelt before him, an act of humility that was worth more than 1,000 words. The pride that had consumed her for so long completely dissolved in that moment. With a trembling voice, she confessed everything. Every whisper of envy, every seed of discord, the bitterness that consumed her. She did not justify herself, she just confessed. She did not ask for forgiveness, she begged for it. Tears streamed down her face, cleansing her soul again. While her body remained clean and healed, David, in an act that showed the greatness of his heart, did not scold her. He helped her up and hugged her. David's hug was not just a hug. It was the restoration of a sacred bond, a forgiveness that was not just from a brother to a sister, but from a pastor to a sheep. It was proof that God's discipline, no matter how painful, is a path to complete restoration. She was no longer the worship leader seeking applause, but a humble servant who had learned to serve, not to compete. From that day on, Anna was never the same. Her voice, once used to seek human glory, was now a pure instrument of gratitude. She still led the praise, but not with the fervor of one who seeks applause, but with the humility of one who knows the price of grace. With every note she sang, the congregation felt the depth of her experience. People no longer saw her as the talented Anna, the star who shone on stage, but as Anna, the humble servant who had been transformed by the hand of God. The light in her eyes no longer came from the spotlight, but from a peace she had found deep within her being. Her presence was not that of a leader, but of a sister, a friend who had returned home. She lived every day as a gift, and her life became a walking testimony. The scars on her skin, which were once a source of shame, became a constant reminder that God's discipline, although painful, is a path to restoration. She did not talk about her experience with pride, but with the serenity of one who knows that pain is part of the growth process. She became the person everyone sought out, not for her voice, but for her wisdom, for her ability to listen and to understand the pain of others. Her story of envy and redemption became a legend in those hills, a reminder that pride can lead us down dark paths, but humility always leads us back to the light. Anna's life became a constant flow of small, significant gestures. She no longer worried about what people thought of her voice, but about what her heart was telling God. She spent hours visiting the sick, bringing a song of hope and a smile of peace. She didn't impose her story. She shared it when the moment called for it, when she saw in someone the same kind of envy that had once consumed her. Her words were gentle but incisive, a mirror that reflected the fragility of pride and the strength of humility. She became the confidant of many, and people sought her out, not to hear her angelic voice, but to drink from her wisdom, to understand the pain and grace that had shaped her. Her relationship with David became stronger than ever. It was not the relationship of a worship leader and a pastor, but that of a brother and a sister who had passed through a valley of darkness and found the light together. They worked side by side, he with the word and she with the praise, and the harmony that was once forced by necessity was now a reflection of their united souls. They supported each other, advised, Each other and the congregation saw in them a living testimony of reconciliation and forgiveness. The story of Anna, of her fall and her restoration, became a legend in those hills, and her name, which was once synonymous with talent, was now a word of reverence, a constant reminder that the greatest strength of a human being is their ability to bow down, to confess, and to surrender to the grace that redeems. Anna's life became a kind of calm river, flowing with a peace she had never known. The days were no longer counted by the search for applause, but by every act of service, by every word of encouragement she could offer. Her tent, once a place of isolation and shame, became a refuge for those seeking advice. People of all ages sought her out, sitting at her feet to hear not about her voice, but about her soul. She told her story without frills, with the honesty of one who knows that pain can be a great teacher. And at the end of each story, she always remembered that true beauty is not in what we do to be seen, but in what we do to serve. Her humility was so profound that it became legendary. One day, a young musician, full of talent and a pride that Anna immediately recognized, came to her. The girl wanted to know the secret of her voice, what made it so special. Anna smiled, her eyes full of compassion, and said that her voice was not special. What made it different was her humility. The young woman, confused, did not understand. Anna then invited her to sing. The girl, with a beautiful voice and a fervor that Anna knew well, sang. When she finished, Anna, with her soft and serene voice, sang the same song. The difference was palpable. The young woman's voice was powerful, but Anna's was sacred. The girl knelt, understanding at that moment that the gift without the heart is nothing. Anna's life was no longer about what she had, but about what she had become. Her humility was manifested in small details. The way she helped the elderly cross the street, the patience with which she listened to the children, the serenity with which she resolved conflicts in the community. She had transformed into a maternal figure, a kind of anchor for everyone. Her presence, once so grand on stage, was now a blessing in the simplicity of everyday life. She had become the voice of the community, not because of her gift, but because of her character. People sought her out in moments of uncertainty, in moments of sadness, and she always had the right words. To calm their hearts, she and David became a pillar of faith for everyone. When he went up to the pulpit, people didn't just see the pastor, they saw the brother, the man who loved and who forgave. And when Anna sang, people didn't just see the worship leader. They saw the woman who had humbled herself and who had been restored. Their union was a constant testimony of the power of reconciliation. They no longer needed words to show what they had learned. Their lives, united in service, spoke. Louder than any sermon or song, they had understood that the greatest honor is not in being seen but in serving, and that true glory is not ours, but His, manifested through us. The lives of Anna and David together became a living tapestry, woven with the threads of faith, forgiveness, and humility. Time passed, and their story became an oral tradition, passed down from generation to generation. The congregation, once divided, became an example of unity, and the basis of its solidity was the story of a woman who, in her search for glory, found shame, but who in her shame found grace. Anna never worried again about the perfection of her voice or the approval of others. Her song was that of a heart that had been broken and then restored, and that in itself was the most beautiful melody. She lived her purpose with a peace that transcended any understanding, and that was more valuable than any applause or recognition. What Anna experienced that day was not just a physical miracle, but a complete transformation of her soul. The 7 spots that covered her skin symbolized the 7 days of her humiliation, and her sudden healing symbolized the complete restoration that God's grace offers. She was no longer a woman chasing the wind, but a woman who had found her place, not on a stage or in a pulpit, but in the heart of God. Her life became an echo of the truth. True leadership is not about dominating, but about serving. True strength is not about elevating oneself, but about humbling oneself. And true glory is not ours, but His, manifested through us. Anna's journey became a lighthouse, a guide for all who felt lost in their search for recognition and power. Her story was a constant reminder that pride is a wall that separates us from God and from others, and humility is the key that opens the door to true communion. What she lived was not a fantasy, but a real and palpable human experience. The people who knew her, who saw her every day, could witness the miracle in her life. Her skin, which was once an image of her sick soul, was now a reflection of her healed soul. Her smile, which was once just a stage gesture, was now the reflection of a genuine peace that came from a satisfied heart. She became the person everyone sought out, not to hear a praise, but to find a word of life, a prayer of comfort. The account of Anna became more than a story. It became a song, not a song with melody and notes, but a song of life, of testimony, of redemption. And this song was sung in silence, through her acts of service, her patience, and her unconditional love for everyone. Her life became living proof that God's discipline, while it can cause us pain, is always for our good. It is to mold us, to purify us, to make us who we were meant to be. And Anna, in her humility, knew that the greatest blessing she had received was not having her skin healed, but having her soul restored. Her life was an example that God's glory is not to be sought, but to be manifested. The congregation of Anna, once small and divided, grew and became a beacon for the other neighboring communities. The story of her healing and restoration was the main topic of discussion. People came from afar to hear the story and to see with their own eyes the living miracle that was Anna's life. She became a leader, not because of her voice, but because of her experience. Her presence was a constant reminder that the greatest wealth is not in material possessions, but in a purified heart and in a soul that lives in constant humility. Her life was proof that God, in His infinite mercy, uses our weaknesses to show His strength. She lived the rest of her life in peace, serving God and her congregation. Her voice, once a tool of vanity, became a tool of love. She sang to comfort hearts, to inspire the weak, and to give glory to God. Her story, told from generation to generation, became an example that God's discipline, although it can cause us pain, is always to lead us to a place of restoration and peace. She never forgot the 7 spots on her skin, and the memory of that day kept her humble, in constant gratitude for the grace she had received. The story of Anna is the story of a woman who lost everything to find herself, and who found herself to find God. Anna's life became a lesson that true holiness is not in having special gifts or in occupying leadership positions, but in living a life of humble service and obedience. She became the person everyone sought out not just to hear her songs, but to learn to love and to forgive. Her experience of pain and restoration made her an inexhaustible source of wisdom. She knew in her heart that her greatest achievement had not been to lead worship, but to be restored, to lead a life of honor to God. And that, she knew, was worth more than all the applause in the world. Her life was a living poem about the beauty of humility and the strength of repentance. Time passed and Anna continued to live her life. In a simple and purposeful way. She never again became the proud and envious person she once was. Her journey of pain and grace had transformed her into a more complete, more loving and more humble human being. She lived the rest of her life in peace, in constant gratitude for everything she had gone through, and her story became a legend that lives on to this day. A constant reminder that the greatest wealth is not in having, but in being, and that the greatest honor is not in being. Applauded, but in being an instrument in the hands of God. The congregation grew and multiplied, but the memory of Anna, the humble servant, was never forgotten. Her children and her children's children grew up hearing the story of their mother, the woman who was broken to be restored. Anna's story was not told as a legend, but as a life lesson, a reminder that the path to true greatness passes through humility. Her life was living proof that sin isolates us, covers us with shame, but God's grace is the only thing that can heal us and bring us back into communion. She, who once sought the applause of men, found peace in the heart of God, and that was enough. Her legacy was not one of songs or sermons, but of service and love. She lived the rest of her days in peace with a heart full of gratitude. She never again felt the envy that had consumed her, for she had learned that her greatest joy was not in competing, but in serving, and that her greatest purpose was not in being seen, but in being an instrument in the hands of God. Her life was a song of redemption, a melody that touched the hearts of all who knew her, and her story lives on to this day as a beacon of hope and restoration for all who feel lost.